Welcome back, everybody, to the Radical Moderate podcast. I'm your host, Pat O'Brien, and this is going to be the second part of my interview with John Yates on legal immigration. And where we left off, John, was we were using an example of a guy named Jose who lives in Mexico City. He's got house building skills, and he's trying to come to the U.S. And I think you had said it could take 8 to 10 years. And let's throw that out as maybe it's better than that. Maybe things go really, really well for him in his journey and his process. How quickly, and I'm coming from the perspective of the construction company, how quickly under this hypothetical could Jose get to the United States and be working for that construction company?
It's probably going to be a minimum of 3 to 5 years in the best case scenario.
Okay. And that's what I'm looking at you, and you're so stoic faced, and I'm just sitting here, and I don't own a construction company, but I'm thinking to myself, if I did, why would anybody do that? I mean, like it doesn't make any sense. And I guess without betraying anybody's confidences, did you have any clients in those kind of situations who were willing to wait 3 to 5 years for that kind of labor?
No, they're not willing to wait. Generally, what happened in my practice is the people got here some other way. And then they were like, yeah, I want to get them legal. And how can we get this done?
Okay. And you're an attorney. So you didn't orchestrate any of this. You take the clients as they are. I think what you're saying, they quote, got here some other way, and probably not the legal way. And then you deal with it. And I'd like to take a step back and maybe you can give us some insight about the broader policy here, because we've really been focusing on the legal part. As a radical moderate, I look at a situation and say, is there supply? Is there demand? And then can we make a market in between? And you think of Amazon, people want things, they want stuff. Amazon says, we got you, and we get it to you very quickly. A lot of times it's within 2 to 3 days, sometimes the next day, or if my wife really, really needs it, it could show up in 3 hours if you're willing to pay a premium. And I think everybody says that's good. That's capitalism. Here, I don't think anybody's expecting a situation where a roofer from Mexico City is going to show up in 3 days. But let's just say 3 years, which I think is the lowest number that you gave me, that this thing could really happen. To me, that's just ridiculous. And so the way I look at this is to say there's got to be a better way. And I know as an attorney, you're dealing with the clients that you have, and there's going to be a role for Congress in here. And I want to get to that in this episode. But I think it's just frustrating. And before I move on from the law, is it possible you have it a little bit wrong, or you give us the wrong impression? Because, man, it really sounds incredibly difficult if you want to legally, even if you're a software engineer, but let's throw that out. Let's say you're a housekeeper, you're a roofer, landscaping companies. It sounds incredibly difficult to legally come here in a reasonable time fashion. Have you misled us? Have you given us some bad information? Tell us, what is the rest of the story?
Well, I wish there were an easier answer. Actually, maybe it's in the interest of lawyers that it's not so easy, because lawyers have to deal with things that are complicated. But I think I've always viewed it as somewhat like tax law. You can try to make the system simple, or you can try to make it fair, but you generally can't do both at the same time. The more simple you make it, the less fair it is, and vice versa. So I mentioned a moment ago that people come some other way. A lot of times they will come legally. They'll come in on a visitor visa, and then they just stay past the time that they're supposed to stay on the visitor visa.
Well, and let's talk about that. So this is not sponsored. This isn't a family sponsorship. It's not an employer sponsorship. But they are here legally, they're a student, et cetera. Flesh that out a little bit for us.
Yes, so there's different ways that people can come temporarily, and there's a whole bunch of categories. It's kind of an alphabet soup of visa categories. You've got F, as in Fox visas that are for students. You've got B visas, B as in Bravo, for visitors, and that can be tourists, that can be business visitors. People can come here for medical appointments on B visas. And so there's a whole range of these temporary visas, but they're temporary. They're what we call in the legal parlance non-immigrant visas, meaning you're not intending to immigrate and stay permanently.
Seasonal workers.
Seasonal workers is another category, right? So they come and work, but they have to go back at the end of a brief period, relatively brief. It can be 7, 8, 9 months, but they have to go back to their home country. And in order to get these visas, you have to show that you have roots in your home country that you're not intending to abandon.
Well, and just kind of talk about those seasonal visas, and I know agriculture is one example of that. There's a whole process for this, right? And so tell me if I'm correct, the employer has a lot of responsibility with those visa workers. And so if somebody comes here, they can't just say, hey, I want to get in the country and say I'm going to pick, almonds in California, but then I'm really going to go do something else. The employer is going to get in a lot of trouble if they consented to that, right?
That's right. For those kinds of temporary worker, seasonal worker visas, the employer has to initiate the process. The employer sponsors, the employer makes representations to the government about what they're going to pay the person, what kind of working conditions, and then they're on the hook if the person absconds once they get here and they don't adhere to their visa rules. Then the employer can end up being liable for that.
Now, abscond, that just literally run away from the job?
Right. Well, they decide to take another job, or they decide to start their own business and not follow what they were approved to do when the government said, yes, they can come in, and in your case, in your example, pick almonds.
So let's say that somebody does abscond. Does the employer have to notify the government?
Right. The employer has to say if they are not complying, if the worker and the employer to some extent are not complying with the terms, that has to be the government has to be informed of that.
And these visas, be it student or seasonal worker, and I'm sure there's other examples, do we have a pretty good bureaucracy that does handle those things and keeps track of those people?
The temporary workers actually works pretty well in a lot of cases. And I think you and I both know someone who works in that space, and that is a system that can work. It's probably not enough in terms of the numbers and the cap that is allowed in terms of some employers wanting more people, but there is a path there. It is somewhat complicated. The student visas generally works pretty well. The universities around the country have a person in most cases that handles it, or maybe more than one person, depending on the size of the university. They work with the students come in, and the students are expected to go home when they finish unless they change to a different visa status.
What are the consequences if a student just gets a job and then just doesn't tell the government anything, just tries to stay here? They're not a citizen, right?
Right. The biggest consequence is to their long-term immigration options, because if you don't follow the rules, then when you do eventually get to the point of wanting that green card or to become a citizen, you have a real problem overcoming the obstacles of your past non-compliance with the immigration rules.
So one of the things I want to get into, because tell me if I've got the picture right. We talked before about family sponsorship, which seems pretty straightforward, and I think you understand the policy reasons. We've more so been talking about employment and both what is reasonable for an employer to do and how long to wait and that sort of thing. But I think where a lot of people get frustrated, and I understand it, is they think that there's a lot of employers out there who have people who they know are not legal, who are not on a green card, who are not on the proper visa, and they just don't care, and maybe they're paying them under the table. What is E-Verify, and how does that work?
It's a good question. So E-Verify is a government system, a government online portal, if you will, that allows employers to enter certain information and find out if somebody's authorized to work in the United States. So everybody who takes a job in the U.S. is supposed to fill out the I-9 form. And so most people who've worked in a job remember having to fill out a form and maybe provide their driver's license and social security number. That's the most, or social security card is the most common way people meet that requirement. The employer can take the information they get from the worker, put that into the system, and sometimes instantaneously, sometimes it takes a few days, can find out if this person is authorized to work in the United States.
Well, that sounds pretty efficient. So this is E-Verify is mandatory for employers to use?
Unfortunately, it's not mandatory. It's voluntary, and
What?
it is
Okay.
it is free, but it's
Okay.
it's not mandatory.
Well, what? Okay. I mean, do we know why it's not mandatory?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons, like anything else that goes on with the federal government and with public policy, that there are interests who may not want to have this mandated on employers. Generally, people don't like the government mandating things. But in this case, you have a lot of interests who don't want to have to go through that process because they're using workers that are low cost to them and may not have the papers that are legal.
I got you. So I think, and let me be clear on what I stand for and what I think the radical moderate approach is. We follow the law. You know, I'm an attorney, and the law is important. And you talked about a policy that could be simple versus fair, and how there's some conflict there. But when you know the law, I think that you got to follow it. And so E-Verify sounds like a pretty straightforward way and a fairly efficient way for people to figure that out. I'm not asking you to know why it hasn't been done, but does it surprise you that it's not mandatory?
It does. I think it's a game changer in terms of addressing illegal immigration. And I've thought about immigration since I've heard this said in the past, that there's push and pull factors. The pull factors are that there's jobs here in the United States, there's employers in the United States who need workers. And for whatever reason, they're not finding those workers. Either they don't pay enough, or the working conditions are difficult, or there's just not enough people in their area. So they're willing to hire people, and that's going to pull workers in to get those jobs. There's push factors in the home countries of a lot of these people because the government is unstable or corrupt. There are natural disasters. There may be crime or other factors, and that's pushing them to leave their home country in search of a better opportunity.
That makes it a lot easier, I think, to understand. And I want to, here in a second, I want to get into the role of Congress, because that's who's supposed to make these rules. But before I do, I'd like to just say the reason I'm pushing legal immigration so much is I hate illegal immigration. I mean, it's just like when you're at a concert or a sporting event and you're waiting in line, and then somebody just comes and says, hey, I'm going to go right in front of you. Even if it's not going to mean you're not going to get to see the thing, it's not fair. It's just wrong to do. But I think when the lines are very convergent, and when somebody says, we don't even know what the rules are, you're standing in a line, but that's not really how this works. That's the other side of the coin. And so how this works, I just go back to the founding of our country, and I think that's pretty clear that Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, the Congress shall have power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. Clearly, Congress sets these rules. I know the executive has to enforce them with the various, immigration enforcement authorities, but it goes back to Congress. So, John, tell us, when is the last time that Congress acted in a big way, kind of a comprehensive way, to set immigration policy?
Thanks for that question. Before I take that, let me just go back to your comment about the rule of law and fairness and people jumping lines. If we went to the DMV and they said, yeah, we'll give you tags for your car, it'll take 3 months. Probably you're not going to wait 3 months to drive your car if you need to drive it in the next couple of days, or let's say it takes 3 years. Depending on how long it takes, people are going to look for other avenues to accomplish what they need to accomplish. And you made the point earlier that businesses can't wait forever to get workers. But coming back to the Congress, the last time we had a real landmark piece of immigration legislation was in 1986 when Ronald Reagan was president.
Well, okay. Well, we're taping in 2025. Let me do some quick math. At 39 years is the last time we had comprehensive immigration.
Yeah, you still had cassette tapes back when this was done.
Yeah, there's no internet. I didn't have a high school degree. A lot has changed. And now we, of course, knew the answer to that question, but there's been efforts. And let me just tell the audience real quick, just kind of bullet point a couple things that I found in my quick research, which is 2001, you had George W. Bush, Republican president, was working with Mexico on a guest worker program. And it was right before 9/11. And then 9/11 happens and everything kind of went, got pushed to the back burner. 2005, John McCain and Senator Kennedy from Massachusetts had a bipartisan bill, but it never got a vote. 2006, the House passed a bill. The Senate passed another bill, but then they didn't reconcile it. Nothing got signed. So that's all kind of the Bush administration. And I think if you look into the history, W. Bush, being a border state from Texas, he wanted to get something done. He tried hard, but it didn't. 2007, Democrat Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid had a bill. That was all during the Bush administration. And in 2013, President Obama wanted to get an immigration reform passed. You had the Gang of Eight. They passed a bill. I want to say it got a veto-proof majority, although it had the power support of the president. And then the House never even voted on it. Before I just pound sand about our United States Congress, it's not like no one's tried. I don't know how familiar you are with those efforts or what has been done, because stuff's happened in the last 39 years. Like, what is the state of the law these days?
Right. I've followed those efforts. And the thing about Congress trying to pass something is that it doesn't go very quickly in general, but it really slows down when it's complicated. And we've been talking a little bit about how complicated the immigration laws already are. To try to amend those in a fair way becomes complicated. So it slows things down, makes it difficult. And what has happened is different presidents have used executive orders and executive authority to make certain changes or to implement certain things around the edges of the policy area because they felt strongly and they thought they could take that action in their executive authority. But we really haven't had the major reform that is needed to make the system work.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, Congress has just abdicated their authority. And it's probably, I'm sure, not just immigration. I don't know the last time this country passed a budget bill. We're always concurring resolutions. So they're just not doing their job. And I'm sure they would say they're reflecting the people they represent. But 39 years for something that I think we can all agree is a very big deal to our economy and to every facet of life. I just think it's ridiculous. And then let me throw this out as a proposition. I think the biggest problem with illegal immigration is the lack of clarity and efficiency with the process of legal immigration. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're on the mark. If it were efficient, and you and I are both big believers in efficiency and having a market-based solution, if it were efficient for employers to match up with workers or for family members to be able to get their family members into the country, then people wouldn't break the rules so quickly. There'd still be some, obviously, but we need a system that works. And back in 86, when they passed that law, they put this I-9 requirement in that we talked about a little earlier. Well, that was intended to stop people from hiring the folks that were not authorized. And it was a great idea, but it hasn't been enforced. And so people either don't do the I-9 or they come up with false paperwork. And so the E-Verify system is a newer, modern version of that. And we ought to update our laws to show that we got the technology now to solve some of these things, and it doesn't have to be so inefficient and outdated.
Well, and yeah, and among the things that's changed since 1986 is there's biometrics now where you can identify people like facial recognition. The technological changes and evolution really are there. I think we're ripe for just some kind of modernization. I don't know that that would change some of these really long waits that you've described here. I want to go back to something, I guess, that's kind of at the root of all this. And I think it's those situations that everyday Americans are familiar with and they don't know what to do. And so I'm talking about housekeepers and landscaping and construction and day labor type people. And whether you want to admit it or not, everybody knows someone, like they personally know someone in those situations. Going back to 1986, it was an update, and I don't know, I'll probably do a whole other show on the history of immigration law in this country, but we're just kind of starting with 1986. That particular bill, under a president who was considered very conservative, did that not have an amnesty provision for people who had not done it legally?
You're right. It did. And their thought at the time was, we're going to sort of clear the slate here. We're going to give amnesty to the people who are here illegally. And then we're going to impose this requirement that you show your authorization to work going forward. And so a lot of criticism has been made of amnesty, and you can look at it as something that Reagan was willing to do and say, well, maybe there was some benefit to it. But at the end of the day, it was getting the system to work and make it efficient that failed.
Just complete aside, my father grew up as a New Deal Democrat and was a big fan of Harry Truman because he dropped the bomb on Japan when my father was in the South Pacific. Ronald Reagan was the first Republican that my father ever voted for. He said, Jimmy Carter's killing this country with interest rates. And I was like 12, so I didn't know all the ramifications of that. But Reagan was no liberal, right? I mean, and so I say that to say, let me throw this proposition out. Let's say that Reagan was correct in 1986 to offer amnesty to those folks. But that now, to get a bill through our Congress, that the proposal was, hey, we're not going to do amnesty. Right. We're just not going to do it. But what we are going to do is create a system that's pretty efficient, that uses the technology we have. It's understandable for people who maybe they need a little bit of assistance from an attorney, but it's not like, oh, well, you have to have an attorney, you have no chance. If the trade was, let's get an efficient system that makes some common sense, but there's no amnesty. And so that literally means you could be deported. You understand this. Tell me from a policy standpoint, with someone of all your years of experience, how does that sound to you?
Well, I think it's clearly problematic. You're not going to address the people. Some people say 10 or 11 million people who are here illegally. If you're not going to address those people, you're not really solving the whole problem, right? And I think from my perspective, there could be a system set up where people have to leave the country and pay a fine, and then they come back in the right way. And there's a whole different way you might go about that administratively and process-wise. But I think there'd be popular support if you said the people who came in, who jumped the line, who came in without papers, they got to leave and come back in the right way. And if we set it up in an efficient way that they can come back in without being gone for years, I think that would bear some support.
We may have a difference of opinion on this a little bit at a nuance. I think politically, what you have to tell the people who are very resistant to pass comprehensive immigration is, it's a two-part deal. Part one is we got to vote on the new system because it's trash. It's inefficient. Just anybody knows it. I don't think you have to be an expert in the field to know this is completely inefficient. In the age of Amazon, this is just completely inefficient the way you guys do this. But we're going to vote on that first. And then the second is we're going to try to resolve the people who are already here. I'm not saying that that's really what I would want to do. I'd have to think about that because I think we all know those people who are here who didn't do it the right way. But I think politically, I think you got to solve the problem going forward first. and then come back and have a vote, because I think that's the reason why we haven't passed it before.
It may be
is because they wanted to do it at the same time, and there were enough people who said, I'm not down with anything that smells like amnesty. I'm not good with that. So then we didn't get the reform that we needed. I don't know if we have a difference of opinion or not, but as I sit here and listen to you and think about it, that's kind of where I'm at.
Well, I think it's a complicated enough system that you aren't going to probably solve it all at once. I think you have to address the people that are here illegally, but because it's been so long since we've had a major reform and we've had so much change in the world, technologically speaking, and in our economy, I think you have to start somewhere, and incremental change is better than no change.
Well, we've only got a couple minutes left, and I want to hit one more topic that kind of relates to all this. In our previous discussion, you've talked about the process of legally coming here, and it's, let's say, employer sponsored, and you said that you have to prove that there's no American that can do the job. Is that an accurate description?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this is kind of tough, because there are people who could go pick almonds in California. There are people who could go get on a roof in the summer. And the question then becomes, well, but will they? Right. They're American citizens. They're born here, but will they do the job? And I know it's something that I'm probably more aware of than, so when I wrote the book 12 years ago to now, I think something I'm a little more aware of is there's a lot of people who don't participate in our labor force who might be able-bodied or close to it. A lot of them might have mental health issues and might have drug issues, but there's a workforce. And some people believe instead of bringing people here legally or illegally, that we just need to use the workforce we have. I know that's not your area of expertise, but how realistic does that sound to you, that you're going to get people who maybe haven't worked in 5 years and now they're going to go be the people who work at the landscaping companies and this sort of thing?
Well, you and I are both capitalists and radical moderates, and it's really a market we're talking about. It's a labor market. And there are reasons why the market's not working, and there are things that happen to fill the needs in that market. And so if there were people available, I think that we would see those people filling that need. And the reality is that others are willing to come in from outside the country to fill the need because those folks are not stepping forward.
I think you're right. But if someone hears this podcast and they want to take the side of, hey, we don't need as much legal immigration as you guys are talking about because we've got Americans right here who need these jobs, if you just pay them more, I'd love, if they're credentialed, if they've got some facts and figures, I'd love to hear that side of the story. My sense tells me, my life experience tells me that that's not the case. And I've run multiple businesses, and just getting people to come to work on time and do the things they agreed to do when they were hired is very challenging. And I think the flip side, and we'll kind of close out with this, when we talk about capitalism, we talk about free markets, the driving force is the customer. So I think what you got to, I think I'd like people to frame their thoughts around immigration, legal specifically, but even illegal to some extent, as if you're a customer. And do you think our houses are being built fast enough? Or would you like to see an acceleration of that? Do you know someone who hires people to cut their lawn? I actually cut my lawn last night. I hate cutting the lawn. It had to be done. And it's a whole long story, but I'd rather pay somebody. My wife says we're not doing that, so she wins. But I think the challenge is, think about it as a customer and then say to yourself, why don't you guys just figure it out? Give me, the customer, what I want, and let free market economics work, and I think we'll all be happier. And I just feel like you got supply. Everybody wants to come to this country. And then you've got demand. We have needs for these people. I think it needs to be rational. And by the way, I would be pretty picky. I wouldn't just say anybody can come here. And I wouldn't say that at all. I'd be very picky, character tests and lots of things. But eventually, I mean, I'm Irish and and my mother was from Mexico. Like long time ago, nothing recently. And I think we're all pretty much immigrants to this country. So, John, I'm going to give you the closing, the time to close here. I appreciate you being on the Radical Moderate podcast. What are your final thoughts today?
Well, I think you've hit on the country being a melting pot, and I think that's been a principle for a long time. That's going to continue to be the way the country is evolving, and we just need to figure out how to make that work so that the system works and it's fair and it's not too complicated for the people who want to hire people or to come in and be residents and eventually be citizens, because that's what a lot of them want.
Absolutely. Well, folks, thank you for listening to this episode of the Radical Moderate podcast. And that is coming from your host. And thank you for listening to the POB.